Thank you very much. Our second speaker of today is Isabelle Vella Gregory. She was born in Malta, where she completed her first degree and later received an MPhil and PhD from Cambridge University. Isabelle works on the Central Mediterranean material, and for the past few years has been working in Sudan at Jebel Moya. She is currently the Deputy Director of the Jebel Moya project, and it's the site of Jebel Moya where she will be talking about today, especially with Henry Wellcome's excavations, well-known excavations from the site of Jebel Moya. So over to you, and thank you very much for offering to present on this.
So hi, thank you so very much for the invitation, and I'm really glad to see so many people working on the related Wellcome collections. So basically, my talk today is more about piecing together Jebel Moya, although I'll tell you a bit about our current project. And then I'll look a bit at Wellcome's project there, how to piece together the jigsaw puzzle and the unintended consequences of archives. And at each step, I'll be making an appeal for information. I know, Ken, when you got in touch about this, you found some fascinating bits and bobs in Swansea. So here's my appeal to all you wonderful curators and archivists. If you have anything, please get in touch, and you'll see why and just what we can do with these archives. So I know we'll be hearing a lot about Egypt these couple of days, but where we are is far below the Sixth Cataract, as far from Egypt as you can get, and between the two Niles. So we're far away from Egypt, Meroe, Nubia, etc., into another completely more fascinating world. So there's Jebel Moya for you on the southern Gezira plain. Now the name means mountain of water, although there is no fresh water currently there, and there hasn't been for a while. We've identified thousands of years of occupations. We're excavating just like Henry did in the valley above the modern village, and as you can see, the site is enormous. And from our excavations, we know that it's been occupied since at least 5000 BCE. And although it's mostly a mortuary site, which is what Henry found, we have uncovered signs of habitation dating to the Mesolithic, and we're still going. So a large chunk of the valley is unexcavated. We've put in a new chronology. We found the second oldest domesticated sorghum in the world. We've got plenty of skeletal data and non-mortuary activity, and we've also identified fairly rapid climate change. And there is our chronology currently as it stands, although we expect phase 1 to go much further. But when Henry went to Jebel Moya, for him, he knew it as a mortuary site, and he was looking for something quite different to what he ended up finding. So, okay, we know Henry as the pharmaceutical giant. We also know that he liked to collect, and like many wealthy gentlemen of the time, he fancied himself as a bit of an archaeologist. Now, he didn't go to the Sudan by accident. Henry was one of the people to re-enter the Sudan after Kitchener's so-called defeat of the Mahdi. And he already had commercial interests there. And so he set up the Khartoum laboratories. Here are some archival photos. So he already had commercial interests over there. But he really wanted to find the next big civilization. And because he was friends with Kitchener and other people, he eventually got a license, and he was sent off far below the Sixth Cataract, where he rather hoped he would find the origin of Africa. So 4 seasons in total were conducted, although the camp only shut down in 1938, 2 years after Henry died. In the first season, he supervised the work, and by supervise, I mean what you see in the photo over there. And he was granted a license, and an unknown number of graves and skeletons were retrieved from the first season. And as you're about to see, these excavations, we have many problems with the information and gaps in data. You will also notice that he had a change of stuff every season, basically. And the archives at the Wellcome collection show quite a few job applications, because at the time you'd advertise in the Times and the Nature for an archaeologist. No one lasted very long with Henry. He was a difficult personality. Because of that, there are so many gaps in the records and that in proper documentation. I should also like to point out that the buildings, any architectural remains you see now in Jebel Moya, including the one behind me in the picture, which is the House of Boulders you see on the screen, that is all stuff built by Henry. It's not the ancient material. There are no ancient structures that we've identified as yet. So in season 3, he gets Dixon and Wainwright, all good archaeologists. We get Duncan Mackenzie, who had just been excavating with Sir Arthur Evans. He and Henry really didn't get along. And so Duncan spent a lot of time at Sagadi and Dar el Mek, which is a pity because he was a very good excavator. And this was the season where he had O.G.S. Crawford, known to many of us here in the UK as the pioneer of aerial archaeology. Now here they sort of carried on a couple of experiments with aerial archaeology. They built this contraption of a kite and the camera. So there's Auric holding the camera. He's the one, number 3. So not the guy kneeling, not the other Sudanese guy, but the one holding the camera. And here you can get a closer look. It's quite ingenious, really, when you look at it. And the kinds of photos that came out perhaps are not really useful archaeologically as we would use aerial photography for identifying features, etc. But nonetheless, they do give us a fairly good picture of the site. And for the final season, he finally got the celebrated George Reisner to conduct limited excavations along with his trained Egyptian workmen. And again, we have Crawford back at this. And as you can see, every season they are digging more and more graves. Whereas us in 2 seasons, we've managed 5 skeletons, I think, in total, because obviously our methods of excavation are very different. There are 2 other actors in this before I move on. So Henry dies in 1936. By that time, the site still wasn't published. He had always wished to go back to the Sudan, but then he was interrupted by the First World War and then by ill health and then by a number of other things which made the return impossible. But the camp stayed there until 1938 and it was run by Sergio Uribe, who hails from Colombia originally, and he was his camp commandant over there. The other person we don't hear much about, and this is one of my other appeals for information, is Ada Misner, who was his personal assistant for many years. And it's very sad because although I can't find anything about her going to the Sudan, and it's unlikely she did, she was in touch with Uribe for a very long time. The 2 had a long friendly correspondence there. That's really interesting. And I'm sure she was involved in making Henry's travel arrangements, etc. And by the time Frank Addison, who's coming up in a second, asked about who is this Ada? Why does she deserve a copy of the book? Sergio tells him, well, she's Sir Henry's companion secretary and best friend. So let's take another quick look at the actors involved. Frank Addison was the one ultimately chosen to see the publication through. No, he was chosen on the recommendation of George Reisner, and I don't know why, because like Henry, he's not an archaeologist, he was an engineer. He taught mathematics in the Sudan and was later inspector of schools. He was appointed acting conservator of antiquities and later conservator, and eventually even wound up with a job at UCL with not a single qualification in archaeology. And I think his report very much reflects that. His assistant, by contrast, was Kirwan, who was highly qualified, who'd studied with Petrie, excavated with Brompton, assisted in the assembly of the Tutankhamun shrines. This was all before he got his first degree. But at the time, if you were, white and wealthy, you had these opportunities. And then he goes back to Oxford, he gets his degree under Griffith and keeps working as an archaeologist. Including the director of the Oxford excavations in the Sudan, and even advised the Sudanese government during the Nubia rescue campaign. And, he lived a long life. I mean, he died sometime in the 90s. So it's a pity he wasn't the one in charge of most of the work here. So here's me chasing records. We know Reisner made several recommendations to Welcome. To the best of my knowledge, these are lost. So if you have anything, hi. And Reisner was a very careful and very good excavator, as we know from his archive and his work in Egypt. So his recommendations would have been really good to read. The material itself, as Ruth was saying earlier, has a bit of a history. Now, this is about the Jebel Moya material. We know there was a depot at Marylebone and a warehouse at Dartford. At the former, staff classified artifacts and repaired pots, and at Dartford, they washed and sorted pots. Again, in the archives, you see several job applications and job ads for this sort of work. The workhouse flooded in 1928, and the Indentures boxes were shipped to Middlesex, as was the Marylebone material, where they were examined by Addison and Kirwan, but that's not all. We know a bunch of items were lost when the Lucania sank. We know from the records there was a bunch of stuff from Jebel Moya there. We also know that the human remains eventually ended up in the Duckworth laboratory, and a number of things like Auric Bates's field journal ended up at the Griffith Institute. I also keep finding random lists of inventory in the Welcome archives, but it's actually really difficult to pin the actual objects with these lists. Like there's references to stuff being sent to Dundee. If there's anyone from Dundee, please get in touch. And also some stuff winding up in Wales, and then I found Ken, and I was really happy to at least figure out the Welsh bit. And I just want to make it really clear that the material from our current excavations is in the Sudan where it belongs. And when select samples are brought to the UK, of course, we go through all the necessary processes. Now, Mike Brass had put together this table that I'm sure will need to be updated after today, which basically shows you where a lot of the stuff ended up that he could trace. So it ended up as far away as Kenya and the United States and Canada. And who knows what else we'll find after today. And this is the Welsh thing. This is interesting. Again, if people can help, I realize that this is Cardiff, not Swansea, but if there's anyone from Cardiff around, we've got this letter to a Stephen Green, who I think was the husband of Miranda Althouse Green, if I've got that correctly, but I might be wrong. But anyway, he asks about these objects, and he receives this letter from Linda Deer telling him that stuff has been sent to Wales. The attachment where she says, here's the copy of part of the report, does not survive. There's other papers in this archive, but they're not related to this. So I have no idea which objects precisely they're talking about, but again, any information very, very gratefully received. Now, despite the stuff ending up in Middlesex, work really only started in 1937, so the year after Henry dies. Now, Henry was famous for keeping all bits that he dug up, which might make you think he was a careful excavator, but again, if you bring up 5,000 skeletons in a few weeks, that's, not good. But so what Addison did was to discard any plain or undiagnostic pots. At some point, the depot was sold, and from Middlesex, the material moved to Willesden. Then the Second World War came along, and once again, excavations are interrupted by outside forces. In our case, they're being interrupted by COVID. The final report was only published in 1949, and the human remains were only published in 1955. And when Addison was done with the material, the objects were further dispersed. But I thought I'd let you know a bit about how Sudanese pots turned up in leafy Middlesex. And I first got to hear of this when David Phillipson asked me about Sudanese pots being found in some posh private school somewhere. And I'm like, I don't know. And then I dug a bit and I found this piece by Martin Biddle. So the story goes like this. In 1949, sherds were found at a place called Applegarth in Middlesex. Applegarth Green Lane, which is at the bottom of the screen. Now, I haven't been able to trace that actual house. It seems to have been torn down. But in any case, this pottery was found. It caused great consternation. And eventually it turned out that this was pottery bought by a Mr. Henry Byrne of Stanmore, Middlesex, a landscape gardener who used it as foundation debris for garden pots. And there was another one. A few years later, in 1953, in Wolsey Road, again, they found a bunch of Sudanese pots. And it was, I think, Martin Biddle who realized they were from Jebel Moya. And it turns out, in the end, what happened was, remember I said Addison was discarding a lot of undiagnostic pots. Clearly, some of them were diagnostic because someone could identify them. They were meant to be steamrollered by the contractor. Clearly, the contractor didn't do that. And they ended up sold and reused as garden waste, which I think it really gives you a sense of how hard it is to track Jebel Moya stuff. But I would also I also like to picture in the early 50s these very sort of middle class people in Middlesex suddenly finding this in their gardens. So there you go. We get other things from the archives, and sometimes you're looking for one thing and the archives are like, I'm going to give you something else. So for example, here's one. This is a work contract. And it's a standard work contract for the time, basically you have to work and the terms and conditions and payment, etc. But the Sudanese workers, or anyone who wasn't a white European, weren't made to sign a contract. They were made to sign an actual indenture. This is something that caused great consternation even back in the UK, and you can read about this in Libyan studies. But essentially here we get a different sense of Henry, who is referred to, when it comes to the Sudanese, he's referred to as the master. And then you start going to the photographic archives, and sometimes they leave you cold, because you think if you've been studying colonial stuff or you come from a former colony yourself, you think you've seen it all. But then, and so the next couple of pictures may be a bit hard, but bear with me. So here we know he built an extensive camp at Jebel Moya. And one minute you're going through archives seeing how much the tents cost and where he got them from. And you can see it's run along these military lines. Notice how everyone's made to stand in a line. There's this, in every photo you see, there's this division between the white man and the black man. Women had no place over here. Henry had a lot to say about the local village women and accused them of all sorts of horrible things, which was unsubstantiated as far as I can tell. We also see here one of the problems of archaeology at this point in time, where you have a huge workforce, and Henry's workforce was over 3,000 people at some point, because he was there employing people, trying to curry favor. And of course, with a couple of trench supervisors, you're never going to be able to control the excavation. And so you end up with almost no documentation whatsoever. So here's another view, again, of the camp. And here's one I find particularly upsetting, where people are turned basically into beasts of burden. And, you know, people were well paid. They also, per the terms of their indenture, suffered very, very harsh penalties, including a case that was so violence committed by one of the white men, not the archaeologists, but one of the engineers, on one of the Sudanese that again had really bad repercussions and even reached the ears of Wingate, who in typical fashion went, oh yes, well, that's rather unfortunate. I'd rather it didn't happen. He also employed loads and loads of children. And again, the archive is full of photos of children being posed. Here we go, for example, there's the children being made to pose, the adults in the background, and Henry sitting back and looking rather happy. And because he styled himself as the Pasha for Jebel Moya, he created this medallion, which is in the collection, and this logo that he used on all his correspondence. So here you see the mountain, Jebel Moya, and there you see Jebel Moya written in Arabic. The other portion of his time wasn't spent on site supervising or excavating, but cultivating as many relationships as he could. Both in the UK, because he tries very hard to get people interested in Jebel Moya, and of course with the colonial powers in the Sudan. So here we have a visit by Kitchener. This was 1 year before Kitchener died. And you know, the archive is replete with photos like this. We're working on this, on doing more work on the photographic archives. Here's the next slide, which I always find particularly upsetting. And ostensibly, we're looking at workmen digging in a trench. But again, if you see the way it is posed, it really crystallizes the division. It really crystallizes what the empire really means in practical terms. And for me, this is the thing with the archives. You know, you think you know colonial history, and then you see it right here in front of you, and it's a whole different experience. But there's been some other good stuff that's come out in the present. The very lovely people at the Welcome Collection found a number of glass plates and things that Frank Addison had a lot of, despite all these photos that you see here, there are very few that are useful archaeologically. But Addison had a number of artifacts rephotographed for the publication. And here's one of them. Now, I'd already started looking at the surviving figurines at the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology here in Cambridge, but there were very few. We also have a good faunal report from our excavations that shows us the change in animals available related to climate, etc., etc. For example, we have water buck in the wetter periods, and then they disappear when it gets more arid. But these are interesting because the figurines at the MAA are mostly of cattle and sheep. And then this corpus started showing us more. Ignore number 9, by the way. Number 9 is an Ottoman pipe that Addison confused for something else. But we end up with this really interesting corpus. Here's another one of all sorts of animals, including, as you can see, number 3 and 4, yoked bovines, for example. And here's a couple of the figurines from the MAA. So some of them were like this. I could see them, handle them, and study them. And many of them, I'll take you through them again, because they're really fascinating, are only available to us in photographic form. And project is very different. It's a collaborative project. At the outset, we work with our Sudanese colleagues. I'd also like to thank the Welcome Trust and Welcome Collection, who have been so wonderful and opened their doors, despite the fact that some of these things can be quite difficult to talk about. Do follow us on Facebook and our excavations on our blog. But again, I appeal to you, if you have anything at all regarding Jebel Moya, even if it seems trivial to you, please do get in touch. We'd be really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that excellent talk on the site. I'm sure it's a place that a lot of people in the audience today aren't as familiar with compared to a lot of the Egyptian sites that will be no doubt featured over the coming days. We have a few questions in the Q&A, so again, post in there if you have any specific questions. I really like that you highlighted the archives in the Welcome collection, which are really fantastic. And over the last few years, I've certainly been delving into them and finding real treasures as to what they have. Bob has asked whether they used a light railway to transport things.
Do you know what? There is a Jebel Moya, which I'd really like to see functioning again. He built a pulley system. Is it pulley, the word in English?
Yeah.
Where you have the string and to take things from the bottom of the mountain. So it's a bit, this is the mountain on top. So you would take things down from the village up here to the mountain. We just carry all our equipment every day up and down. So it would be really useful if we could get that to work. As for railways, at the time, there was a train service from Khartoum to Sinnar. So Sinnar is the nearest town to Jebel Moya. That is not in operation anymore. So that takes about 8 hours by car, although I don't know how long it took them at the time. But he did have a habit of coming down even from Egypt and sailing down the Nile as well. He had the time to do that. But yeah, so they had this pulley system so they could take things up and down. He loved building all sorts of gadgets and things. And when you have the budget, it's a good thing to have.
That was something he wasn't short of. Our next question from someone anonymous is asking whether the families of some of the early excavators have been contacted regarding whether they have personal journals that they may have left, any kind of written record of their activities at Jebel Moya.
So we have the journal of Auric, who sadly died really young in the First World War. It somehow ended up in the hands of Addison, who gave it to the Griffith Institute. As for the rest, I'm not sure that there's anything of value, in the sense there was no system whereby you keep a diary. I think Auric was one of the few who kept a diary for his own personal reasons and because he was trained really well by Reisner to have that. So I haven't traced any so far, but it is something we keep looking at. So thus far we've not been successful, but again, if someone has anything, please let us know.
We have a comment from Paul Nicholson. You mentioned Stephen Green earlier. Paul has confirmed that he was indeed the husband of Miranda and that he lectured in Gordon College in Sudan before returning to the UK.
Thank you. So that was his interest, and I wondered what the random interest in this was. Thank you. And
a couple of questions from Arthur, which are perhaps a little difficult, is well, what sort of things did Welcome do to make him difficult to get on with? Why was he difficult to get on with? And
he knew he knew everything. He was right about everything. It's quite funny because, you know, imagine this. This was one of the problems with Wainwright and the other excavators. Imagine this. You've been working as an archaeologist for a long time. You really know what you're doing. You know what to do with human remains. You come on over and suddenly you have this rich man telling you, you know. But I think one of the ways in which to find how difficult he is he got into his head that he wants to have running water in Jebel Moya. Instead of using his pharmaceutical knowledge to treat existing water, he wanted to dig in the mountains. Now, these mountains are made of basalt. Right? And he spent the equivalent of millions in today's money in trying to get boreholes dug while harvests failed, while sorghum harvests were failing and the people working there were hungry, while there was a drought. Instead of treating the water, he kept insisting and hiring and firing people. And he never got what he wanted, of course, because the mountain is stronger than any man. But even Uribe, in one of his letters to Ada, says that Sir Henry was a difficult man, and one gets that impression. even going through the paperwork. He was so exacting, not in a I want things done properly exacting, and more like everyone should do what I say. So yes, I'm afraid that's it.
Well, thank you very much for that. That was really excellent.